Continue. Okie dokie, Smokey. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Westeros, where I talk about House of the Dragon with my friends who are all wrestling content creators and wrestling fans. My name is Karen. This is my small council, and today we have a very special guest, a compatriot of mine over at Post Pro Wrestling, and I think the first non-North American to join the House of the Dragon. Welcome, Neal Flanagan. Kindly introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you very much, Karen. Yes, I am hailing from the north of Ireland, that is, where in fact they, not this series, but Game of Thrones was filmed on a lot of locations around Northern Ireland and in the capital city of Belfast, where the large soundstage was for much of the interior shots. So yes, I hail from the north, and it's a delight to be with you on the show.
I appreciate you being one of the many volunteers that was like, ooh, pick me. So please tell me about your interest and involvement. How deep of a Game of Thrones fan are you? Have you read the books?
Okay, I would say I'm somewhere in the middle, as far as I'm a fan, but not really super hardcore. I remember really well when the series started on television, and word of mouth got around very fast that this was a terrific show, and even if you weren't into fantasy, you should watch this show. And in my sort of peer group, my friends and co-workers, it really caught on very, very fast, and a lot of people started to read the books. I got as far as, I would imagine, I think it's A Feast for Crows, some part of the way through there, and I just found the writing a wee bit dense.
Yes.
Especially as at that point, in my reading at least, the TV show was overtaking the narrative, and
yeah,
the pacing of the TV show of necessity is much faster than GRRM's writing.
Yes.
So I did give up on the novels, I have to admit. Although I got Fire and Ice for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I haven't read that, and now I don't want to, because from what I hear of it, it would spoil this entire show for me, because we're going to have certain time jumps. I don't think that's any kind of spoiler coming up. But casting news has been out for all of that for quite a long time. So yeah, and I believe you might be able to tell me better that that book really goes through the kind of lineage of the Targaryens. And therefore, if I pick that up, I'll find out very quickly which of my favorites are going to live or die. So
well, you can get to about page 300 and then you have to stop, because that's from like Aegon's conquest of Westeros to the birth of Viserys and Rhaenys.
Right.
So you can read the first 300 pages and then stop, which is what I've done so far. But then last night, for the first time since I talked with WH on week 1, I started slowly continuing to into the age of Daemon, and Rhaenyra hasn't been born yet. So I'm kind of like, I read a couple of pages and I stop, because right now Viserys is starting to get old enough to have kids. Daemon is finally getting old enough to get married. So I'm like, all right, got to put the book back down and go put it in a closet somewhere and hide it away. Because it reads very, very quickly. So even if you like, you thought that the original Song of Ice and Fire was it can be a little long. This reads very quickly because it's not so point of view oriented. It's more of like a couple of historians telling this fictitious history of the Targaryen family.
Well, that's really good to know, because it's sitting upstairs, and I will, I think, pick it up now, because I didn't realize how much of the history is covered up to the point of episode 1 of this series. So that's something I wouldn't mind diving into, because I think in some of the appendices and so on, you do get a kind of family tree, but it's
definitely don't look at that. I cracked it. I was like, whoop, nope, not gonna do that.
And the thing is, out of context, it's kind of, it's in one, you look at it and you don't really kind of take it in very much, but when you start to get a narrative and in the sense of the television show, a face and a voice to these characters, that's something I probably want to avoid.
Well, the good thing is that you can tell where to stop in the book, because the first episode of House of the Dragon, the HBO series, is called Heirs of the Dragon. And the chapter that starts with Heirs of the Dragon as the title, that's where you stop.
Handy.
If you can resist the urge. Because I've slowly stepped into a couple of pages and I'm like, I need to stop, because I know, because they again, like you said, they are starting to time jump, because now we're like with episode 4, we are now seemingly 4 years removed from the start of Daemon and Corlys's invasion of the Stepstones to go take care of the crab feeder. And there has been some seemingly relationships and possibly some fences. So what was your overall impression of episode 4?
Okay, well, I think compared with episode 3, certainly a lot less of the CGI budget was spent. For example, there's a lot less action, by which I mean fighting and some other sort of action, if you want to call it that.
We'll get in. We'll unpack all of that very shortly.
Yes. I did enjoy it. It was a change of pace. There's a lot of politicking. I'm on the fence. We'll get into it. I'm on the fence over just how much it may have strayed into what was a classic criticism of Game of Thrones, particularly in the sort of second half of its run, with the sexposition, as it was called, where it was kind of criticized for, okay, we're going to have an expositionary scene, but we're just going to throw lots of naked, particularly women at in this scene as well, to sort of keep you goggling at it. I haven't quite made up my mind about that in this particular episode. I'm leaning towards no, it was actually really rather well done, and it furthered the story rather well.
Yes.
But yes, it's a definite change of pace, and really quite different from what we've seen so far. Even the number of characters in the episode is quite small compared to previous ones. I don't think, even in the beginning, do we see the sea snake, the Lord Corlys?
We
don't believe so.
I don't think we see him in most of the episode, if at all, in this one. He's mentioned in name and in passing, but he doesn't have any big scenes as he has in previous episodes. What I did like is that the poor Rhaenyra is bored to tears. You can tell that we've time jumped, because she is on the road. She's touring. Her father's finally gotten to her. He's making her sit down and pick a king consort. And unfortunately, where she's at, it's full of old men and young lads that are just like inheriting the family business eventually. And she could look like she could not care less. She just looks completely disinterested, and she's like politely listening. And I mean, if more dating shows had like trials of combat, like battle royale style, it might be a little more interesting. But I started figuring in this episode that my suspicions about her and Kristen Cole were going in the direction that I thought they were going to go. Now, I'm going to stop right here and say, for those of you who have not watched House of the Dragon, or you are curious about the House of Dragon, here is your very, very, very massive disclaimer about the series. Much like Game of Thrones, it is set in a medieval time frame. Yes, there are dragons, and yes, there's magic. However, there are traditional patriarchal tropes. There is power dynamics. There is sexual abuse. There's war, murder, rape, gratuitous sex, not so gratuitous sex, incest, and I and all of my guests do not support these things. We are going to openly discuss them as mature adults, because this episode has a lot of sex. As you said earlier, it's a different kind of action. And in this particular episode, as someone who is a female fan of Game of Thrones, and many moons ago, part of my degree was in film study, and the male gaze was very much a big thing. The way I watched the making of episode that was immediately aired after this particular episode, and they made it very much a point to say that they had a female director done for these the brothel scene and the sex scene, and compared to every other Game of Thrones sex scene in the 8 years of the 8 seasons of the first one and this one, it was very decidedly different. It did not have the traditional male gaze that we're all used to. because the one thing that stood out to me the most was that, yes, of course, this is like, we'll get to it because it's about Daemon and his niece and those power dynamics and the grooming that's involved there. But by and large, the camera shots are all done from Rhaenyra's point, like eye level. So it's more of the female gaze or the young ingenue's perspective of everything happening around her, which was very, it's an eyeful for those who are a little on the prude side, and don't like their romance all that spicy. But it was surprisingly refreshing because it wasn't what I'm used to seeing in Game of Thrones, which is just random boob here and there, very gratuitous sex. And between the brothel scene and what happens later back at the castle, they were both done very well, and they were both done in a way where Rhaenyra seemed to have a lot of equity and control of the situation. Yes,
particularly in her own quarters back in the keep. And that was markedly different, actually, from, it's interesting that you say, you know, you've got there's this thing, the male gaze from film school. When you mention it that way, I'm sort of, I mean, part of that scene back at the keep seemed almost romantic and kind of,
it was tender. It was bizarrely tender.
For Game of Thrones, very much so. And particularly, I thought there's when there's kind of a far away, when you're, as the viewer, slightly further away from the two of them, you don't, as you see lots of gratuitous sort of breasts and stuff like that. It's, or I don't know how to say this without being too biological, but the sort of mid region,
the parts,
is kind
the parts
of
are covered.
Blurred.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there was a bit of modesty preserved, which I think was refreshing from a Game of Thrones point of view, and plays into perhaps some recent comments from the actress. Oh my goodness,
really?
The
one who plays Rhaenyra, or the one who plays Alicent?
No, the actress from Game of Thrones who played Dany.
Oh my gosh, you say that, I'm like, wait, why is my brain
I
going?
know, same here. It's just frozen.
Oh my gosh, this is a very casual Game of Thrones podcast. I am known to brain fart. Is it Emily something? The one I can't spell. Daenerys Targaryen, family tree. No, actress. There we go.
Emilia Clarke.
Emilia Clarke.
I'm sorry for bringing
Emilia
her
Clarke.
up.
I'm terribly sorry if you're listening to this podcast.
Yes, Emilia, a thousand apologies. I don't know what happened to me there, but
she melted into the character so much that we just drew a complete blank.
Yes, she had made some comments actually during the run of the original show that she would not do the level of nudity that she had been called upon to do in the first season. And since, I think there's more recent comments about that if she had her time over again from the get-go, she would wanted to have had a word with the, as it were, with the showrunners about the level of what you exactly what you brought up, that man's gaze, which as a gay man, actually, I can kind of relate to. I don't want to see as many boobs as that. Maybe I would quite like to see Kristen Cole's behind, or John.
I mean, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't say no to a little bit of cheek there. But that was the thing, is that much like the birthing scene from the first episode, the way that both the brothel scene and the bedchamber scene, the way that they were both shot, it left and just enough to the imagination where you could let your imagination fill in the gaps, and it made it just spicy enough. That it wasn't in your face, it wasn't gratuitous. And God bless Alicent, she looked bored to tears when Viserys called her to his chamber.
Yes.
But that version of Alicent, that's very relatable for many people. Just staring at the ceiling being like, when is this going to be over? I'm so done with this right now. Because Alicent, bless her heart, she is trying her best to adjust to motherhood, but she's popping out the kids like she's told, but she does not look like she's having a good time taking care of them.
Yeah.
but and that was the thing, is that and also kudos to Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole. I have never seen someone take off full plate mail so stealthily. Like, you could sneeze in plate mail and you sound like a whole bunch of dishes crashing to the ground, but she was just like you didn't hear buckles popping or nothing. Nope. It was the most discreet disrobing that I've ever seen for somebody in full armor.
That's a hilarious comment, because when that scene began and he's in his full Kingsguard outfit, armored plating, chest plate, all of that, I was thinking, it's going to take the rest of if this is in real time, it's going to take the rest of this episode for the guy to get. She
did most of the work too, so I mean, good on her. But I mean, they moved quick, and that was the other thing. I guess after everything that Sansa went through with the original Game of Thrones, with her sexual awakening, and her the way that she learned about wifedom, as it were, in this portrayal of it, Rhaenyra had more control, both with Kristen and, even though with Daemon it was very much, I still can't figure out what Daemon's machinations for Rhaenyra are yet. I can't tell if there is some kind of love. There has to be some kind of love there, but I don't know if it's from uncle to niece, if it's Targaryen, hey, keep it in the family, romantic love. But the fact that Daemon could not follow, like, he took her there to do just enough to get people talking about her, but he couldn't follow through. The one time that man needs his dragon to fly, the dragon did not leave the pit, as it were. And like Rhaenyra is like, she's having this awakening. She's, she's seen like the knights and everything. She's seen like her, all these people, and like she's experiencing just the voyeurism of the brothel. And like it's like like her father says, like, she's still the blood of the dragon. It awoken something in her, but she seems to surprisingly have it for, I'm guessing at this point she's either around 2021, because we've jumped another year, so she's around 19 to 21 ish.
I think so. I believe at some point in episode 3, I think the King Viserys says something like, you're 10 and 7, so she's gone from 17 to maybe 19, 20, in the range that you're talking about.
So she's at that age where she's supposed to be getting married, but also compared to many other women or girls her age, her sexual awakening is a bit late compared to everyone else, because she's been very guarded, because she's the princess. Everyone keeps her at arm's distance, and except for Daemon obviously, and now Kristen Cole obviously. But it was one of those things where she had like a curiosity about her, but it wasn't an aggressive nature about it. Like, even with Kristen Cole, it was surprisingly calm, but it didn't feel like she was just settling for him because he was there. Like, it was the switch got flipped, as it were, and she's like, you know what? If my uncle and my dad could do this when they were my age, so can I.
Yeah.
Hey there, handsome. Come on in. Hopefully nobody's walked past that doorway where he's very much not standing. But it was very, again, like we said, it was very discreetly done, but also it was done in a way where I didn't mind it. I actually enjoyed watching it, because there were, there were scenes in the original Game of Thrones where I would just be like, why are they doing that? Why is it being shot like this? It felt more level, as if they were equal partners, as opposed to it being very top down.
Yeah. And I feel as though we've seen her make, in a very short time, because the nature of this show is the time gets compressed. I think the biggest jump we've seen so far was probably between episodes 2 and 3, where at least 2 years had passed, I think, perhaps longer.
Because Aegon was celebrating his 2nd birthday. He had just been born.
Yes, of course. And so we see Rhaenyra go from a teenager with a crush on Kristen. She clearly has, kind of
I mean, same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why not? To a young woman coming of age, and yes, more than just kind of being overstimulated by the events of that night and wanting to sort of like, you'll do, you know.
Yeah.
She's always liked him, so it's more of a culmination of that, I think, possibly.
Yeah.
We get enough, I think, from him as well. I mean, he doesn't really say anything, but he is. The two of them have a bond. We've seen that when they were in the Kingswood.
Yes.
And I think he takes his voice seriously. So you have to read between the lines a little. There's no dialogue about it, but I think that he is, you know, he's breaking a vow to do, you know, the White Cloaks are not supposed, the Kingsguard are not supposed,
very much not supposed to
do this. But
and there was a very poignant moment during the disrobing or the disarmoring of him. Is like he very careful, like, you know, he's not pitching anything anywhere, everything's being laid down very gently, very carefully, but he makes sure to drape the cloak over the back of a chair, and his hand lingers on it for a moment, so you can tell that he's very torn between, you know, the vows he's taken as a member of the Kingsguard, but also, like, much like Alicent, Rhaenyra doesn't spend her time with many of her peers or people her own age. Kristen Cole is probably one of the only people in her age bracket that she's seen regularly for the last 3 or 4 years of her life.
Yes.
So it's one of those things where it was like from the moment he asked for her favor at that tournament and he got named to the Kingsguard, they were on a collision course regardless, because from the moment he approached her, there was that attraction from both, and you could tell it was from both ends. This was never one-sided for either of them.
Absolutely.
But I think it was built out of, there was the initial attraction, but it built to a friendship, and now that friendship is escalating a little bit more. And it's going to get really complicated in the next episode, because what we've learned by the end of this one is that so I don't know what happened to Mysera and Daemon Targaryen after he told everyone they were getting married, but it seems like when he went off to the Stepstones to go, you know, fight for a few years, she left Dragonstone and went back to the Silk Road and started running the brothel again. And I can't really tell if they're on good terms, because the morning after they Daemon and Rhaenyra had their little tryst, and they're, you know, experiencing the King's Landing as, like, you know, undercover. He wakes up in a very dingy room on a mattress, very hungover, and she doesn't, like, she's not doting on him like she used to. She's not talking sweetly to him. She's actually rather cold to him, and basically, like, tells him, make sure you pay on the way out. So
yes.
And I was like, oh, okay.
My assumption when we saw that at the very beginning of that scene was that he was still in the House of Pleasure and you know, had run into her, but she explicitly says that she'd left that life behind. So I'm not sure where they are. He has the mother of all hangovers, it seems, but she has very much taken control, and I think maybe there's a little theme of that, but perhaps with the exception of the Queen, you know, that she is taking control, and Rhaenyra is taking control. But there's also the question mark over this the White Worm gets mentioned. The White Worm who is obviously a spy for the hand of the King. Serato.
So I have a theory. I think it's Mysera.
I think so too.
I think, because I remember, I think it was on the HBO website. There was on her bio, she was also, her nickname was Misery the White Worm. So so Mysera is kind of like, if you were to take Varys and Peter Baelish and just kind of mix them together, I think that's where we're going with her.
Yeah.
But then it makes me wonder, is Mysera in Otto Hightower's pocket, or is she part of Daemon's play so he can get Rhaenyra? Because no sooner does, you know, Daemon stop what he's doing with Rhaenyra and runs off, Rhaenyra chases after him, and then a little boy, much like the little birds in the original series, eventually brings word to Otto Hightower, of all people, that Rhaenyra has been spotted with Daemon Targaryen in the brothel, doing things that a young princess who is of age and is, you know, about to be married off should very much not be doing. And I can't tell if there is a certain amount of satisfaction in Otto Hightower's moment right there, or like as a father of a girl who's the same age as Rhaenyra, a sort of, a hesitation because he knows he has to tell the king. He knows he wants Rhaenyra discredited, and he wants to put his own grandchild on the Iron Throne. But he also doesn't want to be the messenger that gets shot, much like his own messenger did when they sent help to the Stepstones for Daemon. So it could go one of two ways. And, Otto Hightower takes this information. He goes to see Viserys. Viserys's health, we can see, is starting to diminish rather quickly. He has most of his fingers still, but he still has the two missing. But now he's got more open sores on his body that aren't healing. There's, he has a whole team of, caretakers along with Alicent. Alicent, I think, is on just, I guess it has been 4 years because baby number 2 is looking like close to a 1-year-old, but seems to be a very colicky baby, and she seems very not happy about it.
Yes.
But then Otto Hightower comes in, early in the morning to tell the king, well, here's what's going on. Here's what I've been told. And here's the problems that this is all going to lead to. And this is where you see a shift where, many people have questioned Otto Hightower's motives, including Rhaenyra. And, Viserys, bless his heart, he doesn't want to believe anything. Like, he wants to believe that everyone's getting along, everyone's doing everything for the realm. But when Otto talks to Viserys, father to father, and has to be the bearer of bad news. You can't tell if he's smug or disturbed about it, but it's very much the he brings it forward and says, this is what's going on. Your daughter was sighted, and Viserys finally, I think he finally draws the line, because it was very much, I think Viserys is finally catching on that after everything that happened with Daemon leaving and, Corlys getting mad about Laena getting turned down, Viserys is finally realizing maybe not everyone is as supportive of his reign as he thought they were originally. And
yes, I think we definitely see that shift in this episode, because they at the very beginning we have Daemon returning with his driftwood crown, or crown
and
of
the
bones,
axe
whatever
of the crab,
it is,
and the axe of the crab feeder,
and laying them before the king, bending the knee, and it's all happy family. They have a big party outdoors, and the king is just, oh, that's my brother, he doesn't like art, ha ha ha, he doesn't want to see the tapestries and so on. So Viserys feel at the beginning of this episode seems like this is wonderful. We've won the battle in the against the free cities and the crab feeder, and I've got my brother back. It's all
literally
going well.
burying the hatchet because he brings the axe of the crab feeder and says, add this to the throne. And it was one of those things where, as that's going on in the background, you just see a tracking shot of Otto Hightower walking past and watching everything. And I was like, oh, those gears are turning.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie, short haircut Daemon Targaryen. Yes, please.
Okay.
But see, for me, that gave me very much season, like, I love my broken men. So like Jaime Lannister, when he gets all broken, like Daemon's on the road to getting broken down at some point. And the haircut, that's the first step. It's the only thing the only real thing he's lost so far is that hair. But it's one of those things where, Viserys is like, my brother's back. Things are finally coming up Viserys. The kids are growing. I got an heir and a couple of heirs to spare now. Much like him and his brother and their fathers before them, there was the the heir and the heir to spare. But now the conversation starts to shift towards Corlys Velaryon, who is very much absent since the battle, or since he left to fight the Stepstones. He seemingly vacated his admiralty. He took care of business, and after everything was finished, he took his brother and his son and their dragons and his people, and he went back home. He did not go to the king. He didn't go to King's Landing. He sent Daemon alone.
Yeah.
And it was very much a statement. And Viserys is like, he can't possibly still be mad at me. Yeah, he can. And at the moment where they all bring up in the small council that, yeah, you passing on, the 12-year-old, I mean, good on him for passing up on the 12-year-old, that he's probably still very upset about it. And, his cousin, Rhaenys, is still very upset about it. And the moment they mention the Rhaenyra talks to her father about what's going on, he calls her out, asks her about it. And she's like, I'm tired, or he calls her his political nightmare. And
that's right.
At that moment, I'm like, we're getting a wedding. We're finally getting a wedding, because in the original trailer, they tease this gorgeous, gorgeous wedding. And in the vein of the red wedding, the purple wedding, and every other wedding in Game of Thrones, in this week's trailer, it seems the wedding starts out like a good time. And it's going to go sideways. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the consistency. I don't know what color we're going to call this wedding. I don't know if it's going to be the black and blue wedding, which is a giant melee, or what. But by the end of the show, Rhaenyra gets informed that she has to marry her cousin, Laenor Velaryon, the younger brother of of Laena, who, again, it helps bring the Velaryons back into the fold, which could have been done with Viserys, but Rhaenyra is much closer in age to Laenor, who we did see in episode 3 at the Battle of Stepstones with his dragon Sea Smoke.
And I think that's one of the things that the show has pulled off really rather well so far, is that even as someone who hasn't read the accompanying book, and so I'm, there's a lot of characters to deal with, and you will know from the original television series and the accompanying books, there are many characters left out of the TV show, but they're throwing a lot of characters at you, but they're doing it in a manageable way. And that was one of the things I was a little worried about at the beginning, from the premiere of this, that I knew there was going to be there would be a core sort of at the court, but there would be a ton of other characters. But Laenor Velaryon just was introduced really pretty briefly in the battle against the crab feeder and his army, but it's obvious who he was, and all, you got what you needed there.
He hit his growth spurt, because in the first episode, him and Laena are at the joust at the tournament for for young Balon, who didn't survive a day, but they're aging them up quickly. So I'm wondering if next week or the weekend or the week after could possibly be the last time we see the younger versions of Rhaenyra and Alicent, because with the wedding being next week, we're gonna have to jump a few years for Rhaenyra to catch up, probably in the baby department. So, but Agreed. It's one of those things where they've introduced a lot of families and a lot of names, but there are still it's interesting to see which ones are at the forefront in this series compared to the other ones, because you can watch and see in the background, you'll see a Stark here and a Baratheon there, but it's more centrally focused on the Targaryens, the Velaryons, and the Hightowers. Those are your top 3 families. And then you'll have Lionel Strong. Lionel Strong might be my favorite small council member, because he's the only one who talks to the king like he's not a complete clown and a puppet.
Yes.
And he seems like a true friend, in the sense that he tells the king what he needs to hear, but he does it in a way where it doesn't come off shady. Everybody else feels like they always have an ulterior motive, just lingering right out off screen. But Lionel's just
it feels like he has a real clarity of thought, where we could be in wrestling terms, headed for a swerve, but he does feel like
his heel turn's coming soon.
But he does feel like he's lacking the agenda that nearly everyone else in this show has. It's the palace intrigue, literally, and his advice, in the context of everything we've discussed, seems quite sound, and the king, I think, is listening to him.
And that was the interesting thing about if I'm remembering last week's episode, you know, Lionel also talks to the king right after, God bless him, Jason Lannister just completely steps in it. And the king's like, he's drunk and he's angry and he's like, so what, are you gonna offer up your son? Yada, 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 yada. And then he's like, you should have married Lena Valerian when you had the chance. Or, and then he's like, and this is where I was like, we're headed for, you know, Rhaenyra to get married off. He's the one who proffers, well, her cousin Lena Valerian, should he survive the Stepstones? So again, I feel like, I don't think Lionel has a political agenda, but in the sense, like, unlike Varys, who always had like, he has little side projects, Lionel genuinely is considering the realm, much like Barristan Selmy. He's very much moral compass, meaning he's gonna die at some point. But it's one of that's one of the rules. Everyone plays the game of the game, as it were, but if you have a moral compass, you're gonna be one of the first people to die. And surprisingly, we haven't had too many deaths this episode. To my knowledge, there weren't any. We walked away scot-free. But after everything that, you know, when Viserys confronts Rhaenyra about what's going on, and she like, and then, you know, also Alicent confronts her in the Godswood, because Alicent intentionally calls her the Godswood because that's the place that they always spent time together. That's also the place, you know, it's a holy place, so you're not supposed to lie about it. So, you know, what I did like about this episode is that with the time jump that they did from episode 3 to now, while Alicent and Rhaenyra weren't getting along when she was the new queen, they're starting to realize that they do have a lot of similarities, in the sense that they're of course the same age or around the same age, but they're also very isolated compared to a lot of the other women at court, and they don't have a tight circle of friends. And you know, and there's that moment at the garden party when Daemon first comes back, where they're sitting, like, they sit down like literally side by side, which you haven't seen them do very much since she's become queen. And she flat out says, she's like, I don't have a lot of friends. I'm a bit lonely. And there's this moment where Rhaenyra just like takes her hand, and I'm like, have the girls finally had that heart to heart that they've been meaning to have since it was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm gonna get hitched to your dad. Like it was a very tender moment. But also Alicent she's in this precarious position where she's trying to be the good best friend, but she's also having to be she's trying not to be the wicked stepmother at the same time. But she has two positions. She has the responsibility she has to Rhaenyra as Rhaenyra's, you know, original first lady, best friend, confidant, etc. Then she also has the responsibility of, you know, as the wife of the queen. And, you know, her and Viserys, their love might not be a perfect love, but it is love. They found love. They're happy. And, you know, she's also dealing with, you know, Viserys's health rapidly diminishing in front of her eyes.
Yeah.
And it's she tries to call Rhaenyra out to have that we need to talk moment before her father or Otto or anybody else gets to her, because she wants to believe that Rhaenyra is still like unsullied, as it were. She is her reputation and everything else is intact. And Rhaenyra, she dodges the question, and she sidesteps a lot. Like, she says, well, nothing happened with Daemon. But of course, she doesn't mention anything that happened with Criston Cole. And I feel like at some point, Criston Cole is going to become a problem for both of them.
I'm afraid so. Yeah, I can see it coming.
I'm not saying it gave me very much like Jon and Dany vibes, but it's everything's going so smoothly. It's almost too smoothly that there's going to be a bump in the road that's going to either force him to choose a side, or it's going to be chosen for him. And that makes me sad, because I kind of like them together.
I do too. A couple of things. I feel that the scene in the Godswood is really stands in stark contrast to the previous episodes scene in the Godswood, and it may even be episode 2. I apologize if it is.
No, don't worry.
But where Rhaenyra is reading, and the king, wants her to come and, join the hunt, and
that was last week.
It was last week.
Yeah.
And she's basically being like, I don't want to talk to you. Does the king command it? Oh, well, then yes, your grace.
Yeah.
There's a kind of there's a lot of friction there. But this time she's calling her your grace, and with a lot of sincerity. She knows she's in, or potentially in, quite a bit of trouble. And it's just a very interesting return to kind of some sort of equality between the two. And Alicent isn't really taking any crap from her anymore, but at the same time, I feel really does have her best interests at heart. So yes, there's clearly in this gap of time, they've mended some fences, I feel. Yes, so Alicent, I think I wondered when I first watched this scene, is Alicent genuinely trying to help? And I'm certain that she is. By the time she's speaking to the king and saying, I believe her. Yeah. She swore to me and I believe her, then yeah.
And I also think it was interesting because, after Rhaenyra being very prickly towards her last week and being like, does my queen command it? But this time around, she's like, I swear on my mother's grave, your grace. And she's like, she's using a lot of language that, Alicent has always wanted Rhaenyra to like treat her as an equal or treat her as family. And after the wedding. So it's one of those things like Rhaenyra's almost like, I'm not saying she's desperately trying to like make Alicent believe her, because, and she's like, well, nothing happened. Well, yeah, nothing happened with Daemon, but, she's conveniently left Kristen off the menu. And it's one of those things where she learns the hard way, or Rhaenyra learns the hard way, where it's just like, what the biggest difference between her and how her father and Daemon connected themselves when they were the same age is that they were men and she's a woman, and she doesn't have the same equality, and that she doesn't have a choice. She doesn't get to, pardon the language, fuck around and find out, as it were. She doesn't get that choice. She is the princess of Dragonstone. She is the one who's supposed to be next in line. She needs to find a consort, and and Alicent does very delicately and surprisingly very tenderly to her be like, your father and I worked really hard to find all these guys for you to pick from, and you just kind of poo-pooed on it and stalked off. So it's one of those things where it's just like, I think Rhaenyra is also learning very quickly that she's running out of time, and that it's the whole marrying for love versus marrying for duty. And, as much as Viserys tells her that, he wants her to marry her for love, that is most likely not going to be an option for her. And she learns very quickly that it's also all it takes is a rumor. All it takes is one credible source to question her authenticity or, her fidelity or her virtue. And then she's considered spoiled goods. If she were a boy, she could go around and do whatever she wants. She could father bastards if she wanted to, and that'd be fine. But as a princess and as a woman, she can't. So by the end of it, it's like, again, Viserys is very bad about having heart-to-hearts with his daughter. Like, he waits until the worst possible moment when he can't take it anymore. And before we get to that, Viserys takes the information that he's learned and he summons Daemon to a very empty Iron Throne room. And this is the first time you see an angry, like, he was a little upset with him before, but this was full on. He's kicking his hungover brother while he's down, drawing knives on him and being like, you are a plague upon me. You're ruining everything. And it was like, at the beginning of the episode, you think, well, Daemon's got that redemption arc going. He's it's going well. Everything's coming up Viserys. And then Otto Hightower lays this on him. And suddenly Viserys is like, bro, what the fuck? What are you doing? And all of a sudden, Daemon's possibly ulterior motive, or his plan B to secure the throne, as it were, was, well, her reputation's damaged. She'll just give her to me now. Marry Rhaenyra, let me marry Rhaenyra into the tradition of our family. He brings it up again. Right.
He does. And it's very intriguing because, as we've already touched on, what are Daemon's? Is he just so primal that he's moving from one impulse to another, or is there a longer game that he's playing? does he genuinely love Rhaenyra and actually want to take her as his wife in the Targaryen tradition? And that, unless maybe there's more in the books that people know,
I haven't gotten there yet.
Same here, and particularly as a viewer, just week to week, I have no idea, and I like it that way, because he's an enigma, and that's so they always make for the more sort of interesting characters.
Absolutely. My thing with Daemon is that it's the, you can't tell what he wants. Does he want, like, so when he got exiled the first time by Viserys, all he wanted was his brother's approval. He wanted to stand at his brother's side and be the hand of the king. He wanted desperately, so desperately, to be part of the small council, but he kept getting all of these jobs that he was intentionally bad at, because those weren't the jobs he wanted. He wanted to be the hand of the king. And it's like, when he goes to see Viserys, he looks miserable. He looks miserable, not just because he's hungover. He actually looks genuinely devastated that, I don't know if he was remorseful for wanting to do this plan that he had to, get Rhaenyra, or if he was mad that he didn't follow through on it, or if it's he's just broken and tired of, like, trying to get his brother's approval. It just, like, this version of him just seems very desperate to be part of the family again, because he's realized he doesn't want to go back to the Vale. He doesn't want to see his bronze bitch, as it were. Messiah is apparently, she's gone into business. She's gone back into business for herself. She's doing very well on the Silk Road. She's dealing in information now, along with running a brothel. So it's the Daemon wants to go home. He wants to be home, and he's just like, well, doesn't this just make sense? Just let me marry Rhaenyra. And it's but would you be satisfied being king consort, or would you want to be king? And that's where Viserys draws the line. He's like, you can't be here. You're not good for me. You're definitely not good for Rhaenyra, and you're too impulsive. Like, you just want everything when you want it now. You don't think. You always act first, and then it's the ask for permission later, ask for forgiveness first. Like, so it's one of those things where he's just. I feel like Daemon needs a life coach. It's like somebody needs to sort him out.
Need to get him in touch with my co-host on the wellness policy.
Telling you, man.
Who is a certified?
Bring him over to wellness policy or to postmarks. Just like bring him over and be like, all right, Daemon, we're gonna unpack some things with you because we think you need some help.
His impulsiveness is off the scale, as we saw last week in the battle. Was just like just to almost spite everyone. Yes. I'm going on my own. I'm going to pretend to surrender, and then I'm just going to kill everyone. But he gets away with it.
And in that scene, it was like last week. It reminded me very much of how Jon Snow handled Battle of the Bastards. Like he just stalked out on his own, and I don't usually do like gore very well, but when he came out of that cave, like drenched, like literally bathed in the blood of the crab feeders, dragging half of his torso behind him, I'm like, oh yeah. Yes, King. Yes. Whatever you want, you have it.
And we're on the same song sheet, because I'm not one for gore particularly, and particularly gory movies. I won't watch those kind of horror films. In the context of a good story, I don't mind it at all. The one thing that makes me squeamish is depictions of cruelty to animals. The stuff with the deer last week, I could barely watch, and I knew that it's CGI, and I know that no animals were harmed in the making of this television program. But those scenes,
when the horses flipped over in the joust, I was like, no, stop.
Exactly. Yeah, but if you want to cut a guy in half, nope.
It's no problem. It's fine.
I'll watch that.
But it's just one of those things where it's just like, I don't know, like for 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, I kept waiting for Jaime Lannister's redemption arc to happen. Like, personally, I'm in the camp that he should have been the one to kill Cersei, not die with her. But I season 8 finished and that didn't happen. So I don't want to invest that same kind of emotional weight into Daemon Targaryen just yet. Be like, no, guys, he's gonna get better. I promise you, just let it play out. I don't have the energy to be like, it's coming, guys. He's gonna have that moment no, I think last week was that moment for him when he stormed the beach by himself. I don't know if we're gonna have much more of a redemption moving forward, unless what I did like about him at the beginning, after when Rhaenyra's on the ship, and giant ship, big black sails with the Targaryen logo, and he flies Caraxes right over, and Caraxes just nudges the ship just a little bit, and it's like everyone's like batting down the hatch, and everyone's panicking, and I'm just like, bro, that was no accident.
No,
because you see Rhaenyra, and she looks up at the sky and sees Caraxes, and she's just like, she doesn't know if she should be happy or worried or what, but she's just like, he's back. So it's I'm hoping that wherever they move forward, I'm wondering if the fight next week. Did you watch the trailer or the teaser for next week?
I haven't seen the teaser. Okay. Oddly, they don't show it at the end. A channel called Sky Atlantic has the first run rights here. We don't have HBO, so they
I think it's on
license
YouTube.
it. I'm sure it will be. I could seek it out easily enough, but no, I haven't seen it. The teaser for next week.
So at the end of the episode, Rhaenyra basically gets the ultimatum: you're marrying your cousin, you're marrying Laenor Valerian, whether you like it or not, yada 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 yada. But on the HBO feed here in the States, they have the episode finishes, they do the trailer for next week, then they do the making of behind the scenes. And the wedding, there's a grand feast, but a fight breaks out. And now the more I think about it, I'm wondering if Daemon Targaryen is the instigator for the fight that breaks out, because
it would be in character.
He's the only one. I'm like who could show up at her wedding and start some shit? It's probably gonna be Daemon, isn't it? Yeah. Especially because he was pleading with Viserys in this episode, let me take her. I'll take her how she is. I don't care. I don't mind. I in his own twisted, weird way, he does love her. He's just going about it all the wrong way, obviously.
And to go right back to the gifting of the necklace, I think that's kind of been the case all along. Maybe he doesn't quite know what it is he wants, but there's been a kind of, and then of course at that point, given the age of them, is particularly the age of Rhaenyra, a bit creepy, but although not quite as creepy as the books, where folks in the TV shows everyone's aged up. Yes, that's something.
Dany was aged up a lot, because I believe she was like supposed to be like 11 or 13 or. So it's one of those things that the series has been good about aging certain characters up in order to make some scenes and some character arcs less creepy and weird.
It does. I mean, it doesn't take away the creepiness in total, but yes, that's right. And the Stark kids as well in the books are at least 2-3 years younger at the beginning. And that's where we start from. I don't know that that's the case in this story or not, but either way, at the beginning, Rhaenyra is what, 13 or 14 or something
around there,
so yeah, it's a little unsavory, but yes, I think to get back to the point that Daemon has a thing for his niece, and probably has had for quite a while, which in this world is not unusual for a Targaryen, as we're reminded
constantly. Daemon likes to bring it up a lot. I think it's also to help justify his own complicated feelings about the situation, which is part of the reason why I think he couldn't follow through when he took her to the brothel, because it's he himself, he keeps saying that, well, it's the tradition of our family, it's the tradition of our house, yada 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 yada, but at the end of the day, he still hesitates. So it's like there's somewhere deep in that little dark heart of his, there is a moral compass somewhere.
I feel, yes, at first when they sneak out of the secret passageway into among the small folk of King's Landing, my sense was, this is calculated. Daemon is doing this because he knows that perhaps every night there's this little showing of the kind of mummers, the actors are doing their little pantomime about
Yes.
the crown and the succession. And he wants her to see this, that the people don't want her to be on the, to be the heir,
Yeah.
and so on. So that was my sense at the start. By the end, though, of their adventures in the hour of the owl, I think, as it's described, kind of in the middle of the night, I was just nonplussed. I just didn't know what Daemon's motivation is, and I'm not sure that he knows. I feel like he is a very primal creature in a sense, and is just following impulses, and it's done terrifically well. Just to throw that into the mix, is there's really not a bad piece of acting in this show.
No.
Even by some of the minor characters, it's terrifically well done. I mean, I'm told, for example, we know that Paddy Considine, the actor who plays Viserys, is a very accomplished and well thought of actor, and Millie is a relative newcomer, but the on-screen performance,
their chemistry is very natural.
Indeed, yeah, that's what I was trying to drive at. There's no sense at all, even in those tiny moments where you're looking for acting instead of just going with the flow. They're tremendous together on screen, and it's going to be a shame when I think she leaves the stage, that actress. But you know, I get that this is a different beast from Game of Thrones. We're not following kind of the adventures of one family, or this, you know, in the case of the Stark children, it is one family, but it's more generational in this sense. And if there's this, I believe season 2, in the least surprising move you can imagine, was kind of commissioned after one episode.
I'm sure.
So we're going to see, I imagine, generations and generations by the time this show wraps. So yeah, in that sense, it's very different from Game of Thrones. But yes,
I think I read somewhere that the first season will cover 20 years. So we're going to have a time jump, probably not this week, but the following week, when, after Rhaenyra's married, and I guess whatever happens. But it's that's why I need to know, like, I have to wait until the last episode of this season finishes to know how far in the book I have to read, because I don't want to start reading now and then realize, oh yeah, by the way, season 2 is coming like next year. Don't read it I have to like stop myself because I don't want to spoil it. Usually I'm very much in the camp of I'll read the book first and then watch, or I'll read and watch, like I'll do it in at the same time. But the way that Fire and Blood reads so easily and so quickly, I'm like, no, I can't do it, because I don't want to have to sit there and like be like, I can't talk Game of Thrones, because at my office, a lot of my colleagues, we all watch Game of Thrones. So with House of the Dragon, we've renamed Tuesday Targaryen Tuesdays, where we all like we give Monday like the 24-hour embargo where no one's allowed to talk about it in the office. But then like Tuesday morning, we all like get our coffee and like all like congregate in a corner and be like, hey, so what'd you think of House of the Dragon this week? Well, here's my thoughts. And then, like 45 minutes has gone by and they're like, all right, I guess we got to go back to work now.
Reminds me very much of my pre-working from home days, that we were all sent home, in my case, from the office at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And it has worked rather well in my workplace, to the point that we rarely see each other in the office space anymore. That has its benefits and its downsides as well. And one of the downsides is those sort of water cooler, coffee break moments where you can, and the lack of gossip. You don't get that on Microsoft Teams or on Zoom.
It's not the same. It's not the same. Like, like just like leaning in someone's door, like very much like an office space, like leaning on a cubicle, or like leaning in a doorway and just like talking a little bit. But yeah, but it's one of those things where like I have enjoyed finding kindred spirits, both like in my office, my actual place of work, but also like in the wrestling fandom, where people are like, you're gonna do a Game of Thrones or a House of the Dragon podcast? Let me do it. I'm like, welcome. I don't know if I'm gonna eventually go back and do like a whole review of the my thoughts on the very first part, all of Game of Thrones or whatever. But it's one of those things where, they're talking about the Jon Snow spinoff. Corlys Velaryon might get a spinoff. So I'm just like, we got spinoffs.
That's right.
Let's go.
And not to mention in the fantasy realm, I have seen some tweets from a certain person in my virtual presence right now on the Rings of Power as well. That's
yes. Have you watched Rings of Power at all?
Yes, I'm not quite up to date. Last Fridays I haven't caught up with yet, but I've seen the first two and was. I tried very hard to. I don't want to hijack the discussion away from what we should be talking about.
I am also a Tolkien fan, so it's okay.
Me too.
And it's my podcast, damn it. So we'll talk about Rings of Power. We want to talk about Rings of Power.
And it's the reason it popped into my mind as well is because we were talking about books versus televised or movies, screen adaptations, and I'm in my 40s, so when I was a teenager, there was kind of a resurgence of Lord of the Rings for some reason among my peer group. I'm talking about reading the book, of course, at that stage where the Peter Jackson films were years away.
Yeah,
I think at that point the only adaptation was a kind of an animated.
I remember the Hobbit, right?
It was like rotoscoped kind of animation.
Yeah.
Weird. It was, and they never finished it. I think they got about halfway through Fellowship of the Ring and then abandoned it. Anyway, so I was very familiar with the source material for Lord of the Rings, and therefore, for example, super critical of the 3 movies that made it of the Hobbit adaptation, which not only strayed from the source material hugely, but strung the story out to a really ridiculous level.
They're like, we'll just make more movies. Put Legolas in it. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the original, of course, the Lord of the Rings lent itself to a trilogy. That's that
I
fits,
have those DVDs somewhere in my house.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the Rings of Power. Yeah, I wanted to go into it thinking, right, okay, this is a fantasy show that is coming out at the same time as this, very high profile other fantasy show. But I'm not going to directly compare the two because it's not fair, and I know that they're coming from very different viewpoints. You're not going to see the levels of grittiness, let's say, in the Tolkien adaptation. So all of that said, I've really enjoyed it so far. I watched the first one and I thought, am I or am I not? By the end of the second episode, I was absolutely sold. And
wait till you watch episode 3.
Good.
It gets good. And for me, it also reminds me of the time, like, when Lord of the Rings debuted in the cinemas. It was the same time where the Star Wars prequels came out. So it was another time where there were 2 very high profile franchises at the same time, where it was just like, so, some people were very entrenched in the Star Wars camp only. Other people were very much in like the Lord of the Rings. And I was just like, I love all the things. Give me all the fantasy and sci-fi. And that's how I feel about right now between, some people are like, no, it's only House of the Dragon. No, it's Rings of Power. No, it's all fantasy, man. Just love it all.
Absolutely. And for anything in pop culture, really, I feel like I'm old enough to remember the on this side of the Atlantic, the sort of chart war between Oasis and Blur, which were the two great kind of 90s Britpop era.
I think you and I are on the same age then.
I think so. And that was kind of, you were meant to fall into the camp of liking one or the other. And I was like,
right, like
both
both.
of these bands are awesome, in their own, and have very different kind of sounds. And you can't just dislike Blur because they're art school kids compared to the sort of working class. Oasis. There was so much nonsense about all of that. So I think that goes for movies, TV, film, books, wrestling. Very good point. Wrestling. Yes, these comparisons are often just completely specious and should not be countenanced. Very wordy, but you know what I mean.
We're talking about dragons and elves and orcs. Like it's not that deep. And it's one of those things where for me, and you've probably seen this discourse on Twitter as well. They along with everything else, they've released a new Little Mermaid trailer. And for some reason, I don't know why people are mad about diversity in fantasy. Like,
This
it's a
is-
beautiful thing. You see all these different
Yep.
people, all these, you know, they're like people. I'm getting so burnt out on, like, I hate to say it, white people in fandom who are just like, no, she doesn't look like me. Of course, you're not the only people
Yeah.
on the planet. I was thrilled to see that they made a black Ariel. I was like, let's go.
Mhm.
Like, it, and like for me, seeing my friends who are, you know, in underserved races or populations, and them being, you know, them having representation on a franchise like Disney, hell yeah, give me more of that.
Tremendous.
Like, same thing, Corlys Velaryon. And yes, I like that he's a handsome black man. I like that there's, you know, there are hobbits that are like every single color of the rainbow, and it's amazing. And I wish there was, like, this is not the place for people to be like, oh no, in the original source material, like, you don't know what the original source material said.
I know.
There's like
People are
no descriptions.
There's something wrong with somebody who will focus in on the word fair, F-A-I-R, to infer from that Tolkien intended all elves to be white.
Yeah.
What?
No.
You know, and even if he did,
they could mean easy on the eyes. That also means fair.
Of course it does, yeah. And even if he did, come on, you know, it's 2022, and we want to see
the books are written at a different time.
Reflected. Yeah, we want to see society reflected back at us, and this
Absolutely.
is fantasy. So yes, it's a discourse that I try to avoid when I see it on Twitter. I'll just sort of keep scrolling or mute or something like that.
It just makes me sad, because it's like we're supposed to be an evolved culture, and people just keep harping on it. And I'm like, that's not it, man. Like, there's if you think that that's like, that limited scope is what things should be and how they should be, then you're not fully enjoying. If there can be a black dragon, a white dragon, a red dragon, and a gold dragon, there can be people of many different races in Westeros. That's my soapbox. Like, there are people.
Yeah, or Middle Earth, or you name it. You know,
outer space. Yeah. People getting mad about the dark, or was it the third sister from the Obi-Wan series?
That's right.
Why?
To the
she
point
was
that
amazing.
She was tremendous character and
absolutely
wonderfully played.
Like, fantastic. And you know, there was talk about Star Wars. There was the Asian actress that they bullied her, and I'm like, why? She's great. Like, what? Like, I don't know what is wrong with people. No, like, if like, personally, I'm going to gatekeep is that if you don't think everybody should be included, you need to kick rocks. You need to get at it, because the fandom's not for you. If you can have orcs and like half dragon people and elves with pointy ears, why is it so hard to fathom? I just don't understand it. Like, it just,
I couldn't agree more.
Biscuits.
And I mean, you don't even have to go that far, even outside the realms of fantasy and sci-fi. You know, Friends is on a loop on certain cable channels here, and I think on Netflix or whatever.
Yeah,
that's a show about all these white people, you know, who only know other white people.
Yeah.
And in New York City,
you know,
you know, I mean, I've been there enough times to know it's a diverse place.
Yes.
So, and even Seinfeld, which I absolutely adore. I find it hilarious and still like to rewatch it. And Frasier and some of those American sitcoms that really did come over across the Atlantic.
Yeah, those are like 90s era sitcoms. They were all peak. Very white families, very affluent white families.
Everyone's white, yeah, and it's kind of, we need to get by that, and in no matter what depiction. A show I'm really enjoying. I know we're way off the topic here.
That's fine. Again, this is a casual podcast. You want to talk about whatever you want. We're talking diversity in fantasy is a part of the greater issue. And you know, even before House of the Dragon got started, people were mad about the casting of Corlys and his family. Why not? Like, they are like the Valerians originated in Valeria on Essos, where compared to Westeros, there's a lot more diverse families and people in Essos. So why not?
Exactly.
Don't feel bad about it.
And we've seen that with Bravos and Pentos and the other parts of and the doom of Valeria is still kind of shrouded in a bit of mystery. So some of the areas closer to the, I guess, east of Essos, we don't know. we don't know that much about. So yeah, no, we can agree 100% on that. That
it's one of those things like people are making assumptions. You know what they say when you assume something.
Makes sense. Yes.
It makes an ass out of them, not me.
That's it.
Well, I think, is there anything that we didn't talk about in yesterday's episode that I'm forgetting?
Let's see. I don't really think so. We touched briefly on Otto Hightower's motivations and his
most important
when he receives the information.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about, is he happy to have this information? Is he, you know, he definitely wants his grandson to be the heir.
Yes.
I think we definitely know that. But it felt to me like almost a miscalculation. He knows the king well enough to know that the king absolutely adores his daughter.
Yeah.
So he will have expected the blowback here. I feel he definitely made an error because he is stripped of his title. He is stripped of being.
That was the part I forgot.
And so he got it wrong, which is unusual for the man in this, seemingly in his history of serving two kings, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I don't know what his motivations were entirely, but I think it's fair to say he definitely fucked up big time.
Yeah, he did.
His little badge is gone.
I feel like he was thinking that because he's the father of the queen and he was talking to Viserys father to father, that it was going to be he was going to like thank him for this information and you know, like, you know, he's protecting the family, yada, yada, yada. But Viserys takes it in a completely opposite direction. He's just like, you're overstepping. You've just showed me your hand. And all you want is your grandson on the Iron Throne. You want me to, you know, like remove Rhaenyra from the equation. And just the moment of Viserys walking up to him and just like slipping the pen off of him and just taking it back and being like, the realm thanks you for your service. I'm like, ooh. Wow. So now it's Otto Hightower's in that lovely class of man, along with Corlys Velaryon and Daemon Targaryen, where he has nothing to lose. And he's desperate. So I feel like what's going to start happening now is he's going to throw all of his energy into ensuring that Aegon is the one that ascends the throne and not Rhaenyra.
Agreed. Yeah. I think that's his motivation anyway.
Yeah, because you know, he's been trying to get Alicent to make that move for the last since Aegon was born. But now it's more not imperative, but there's like he has a greater sense of urgency now because he thought he was going to be set for life as the hand of the king, and he's no longer the hand.
Yeah, but it also speaks a little to Viserys, unlike his namesake in Game of Thrones, who's complete. You know, and we know how that ended. The hands of Drogo. Different
Viserys, different outcome.
Yeah, he is quite merciful. But I mean, particularly he has a soft spot for Daemon. I think another Targaryen, or even a Lannister that we saw in the original series in Game of Thrones would have just sent him to the wall.
Yeah,
at the least.
Yes.
If not a head on a pike.
Yeah.
In this case, the king is being really kind of kind to Daemon in just exiling him for the second time. I mean, he already did that. You know, he's doing it again.
He doesn't even like offer him the wall. He's like, just go back to your wife. If she'll have you, just go back. Like normally, considering the claims that were made and what the, you know, Daemon's end game was, which is basically like trying to make sure that he's the one that marries Rhaenyra, he could have put his head on a pike, sent him to the wall. He could have did a whole bunch of things, but he just like he lets him go. And and Daemon was the one who said this in like when he gets cast out the first time. He's like, I want to protect you from yourself. And I feel like Viserys is catching on too late, that too many people have already rooted themselves into his system so much that he has to literally have the problem like in his face for him to realize Like he doesn't have long vision on this. He doesn't have the big picture. Like he needs it like literally smacking him in the face to be like, oh yeah, maybe you're not the guy I thought you were.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any predictions moving forward? What would you want to see? If you could fantasy book, what would you like to see happen between now and the end of season 1?
It's such a difficult question because of these time jumps, and I don't know, who will be left standing. I know that I want to see Matt Smith continue as Daemon for as long as possible because he's killing it in the show, literally and figuratively. And I feel he's going to win some victories along the way. I don't see him taking the throne, and again, just to reiterate, I'm speaking as someone who does not know
that's fine.
The book knowledge or the lineage or the family trees. So I don't know whether there's a King Daemon.
I don't know either
at any point. So
I stopped before I could get to that point.
Yeah. So I feel like he will continue to be a thorn in the side. That's a rubbish and vague prediction, but I think
fine.
We're not going to see an end to him particularly quickly, and I certainly hope not.
Yeah. Were you into Doctor Who when he was the Doctor?
Yes.
Who's your favorite Doctor?
It's still, and this again is showing my age, Tom Baker from the pre-revival, because
wow,
because that big booming voice and the huge scarf
is
one of my earliest television memories, because it was on BBC at sort of 5 p.m. on a Saturday, and we used to go and visit my grandmother on a Saturday, and that's when I would see it. I was a little kid, so it has stayed with me ever since, because I used to be scared to death of the show at that age. It was on at sort of dinner time and had all these monsters and
which monster were you the most afraid of?
Oddly enough, the Daleks, which people laugh at because they're just these sort of pepper pots that
they look like a salt and pepper shaker.
All you have got to do is run up some stairs. Well, used to be the joke, of course, that we know now that they can hover. We've seen that and indeed fly through space. But back in those days, that stairs would confound a Dalek. So, but yes, I used to have nightmares about them. Coming at high speed, chasing me up down the road and shouting "exterminate" at me.
But, I was very late to the Doctor Who party. So back in 2012, I started watching it, and that was after Eccleston and in the middle of Tennant's run as 10. Mm-hmm. And so for me, 10 was my Doctor. And the way I cried when he regenerated into Matt Smith as 11, and it took a good 2 years for me to consign myself to Matt Smith's version of the Doctor. And then, of course, by the time his run was finished, same thing all over again. So when he was cast as Daemon, I was very excited, but also very much I need to separate Matt Smith, the actor, from Doctor Who. It's not going to be 11 playing Daemon Targaryen. It is the actor. Because the only other thing I've seen him in was The Crown, like the earlier seasons of The Crown. And it was one of those things where I'm just like, I was excited to see him in something new, but also at the same time, I'm just like, I need to like compartmentalize my nerd brain to be like, yay. Because, the very first episode of House of the Dragon where he's in the brothel with Messara, and I'm like, the 11th Doctor doesn't do this. I was very upset.
We do see his, we do see his partition. Like, I do think we see his bottom in The Crown, quite in an early episode. That stuck with me for some reason, Karen. I can't think why, but
again, it was one of those things. I was just like, no, why? Where are his pants? Where his like his high water pants and his bow tie? Get the suspenders, cover him up, please, and thank you. And now I'm just like, okay, I'm fine. It's been enough time has passed where I can see Matt Smith as Daemon Targaryen and also as 11. So.
Yeah. We can all move on. Yeah, I think that I can understand, though, that the original pre-revival Doctor Who was not particularly well known, apart from some like really hardcore nerds sort of in a small hall at San Diego Comic-Con,
Yeah.
Probably in the 1970s or something like that. As compared to like in Britain and Ireland, it was on the biggest TV channel at a very prime time and got lots of viewers. Going forward in time to Christopher Ecclestone and everybody who followed, I think it got much more of a worldwide audience at that point, a transatlantic one anyway.
I think that was around the time where BBC Americas started getting really, really big. So they brought that over and everyone's just like news, because like America for some reason was like dying for a really good, I mean, we have Star Trek, we've got Star Wars, but we needed another like nerdy, fun sci-fi camp thing. We only had one season of Firefly and then that never continued. And so it was one of those things where it was the perfect storm of timing, content, legacy, characters, and that was another series that had like some of the situations were so like off the wall, but at the same time it was very easy to follow.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that we have that lovely sidebar, for me, I from what I've seen of the trailers, both at the very beginning and up until now, I do see that Daemon will be around when we have older Rhaenyra. I don't know what their affiliation will be at that point. I don't know what the relationship will be at that point. I don't know if they'll be friends, frenemies with benefits, married, unmarried, who knows? But it seems like they are at least, knock on wood, going to be here through season 1 and hopefully into season 2. Because again, you're gonna have a very difficult time once every time the Game of Thrones franchise loses a major character. You don't want to, like, the rule of thumb is don't get attached to anyone because everyone's fair game to die. But it's one of those things where it's just like with Viserys, it's been the slow burn. We know it's coming at some point. He's going to die.
Yeah.
Because his health is deteriorating. It's like the more time they jump, the more like poor condition he's looking
indeed
into.
And they've sown the seeds from that from the very beginning. And we see just a deterioration in every episode. So I feel like he's not much longer for this world, and but that's not going to be a great shock to anyone either.
Yeah.
It'll be a loss in terms of the acting
Absolutely.
and the presence he brings, but yes, it won't be that sort of shocking Game of Thrones penultimate episode type Ned Stark end. You'll probably just
I still haven't recovered from that.
I can't. Yeah, it's. I think that's just a seminal cultural moment at this point, particularly for people who hadn't read the first novel. We're just what? Yeah,
when my friends tried to get me to watch Game of Thrones, it was when I was flying, and I had just was looking for a new series to get into, and my friend's like, "Here's this book, Game of Thrones. They're making into a TV series, and because they knew back when Lord of the Rings was at its heyday, Boromir was one of my favorites. And they're like, it's played by, Sean Bean, same guy who plays Boromir. And the first words out of my mouth were, he dies, doesn't he? And you see everyone in the room just stops. They're like, he gets through most of the first book. And I'm like, of course he does. But he was a character that, even though he passed in the first season, he was referenced and, flashbacks throughout the remaining of the series where he was, Ned Stark's shadow was always somewhere. Yeah. And I feel like even when Viserys does expire, they'll do flashbacks or they can't do flash forwards, but like flashbacks or, more like continuity filler episodes where they can kind of like weave the parts that we're missing together. Especially once Rhaenyra might be on her own having to deal with the prophecy and what the prince who was promised means and moving forward with that.
Yeah, and that was another really cool scene actually in this episode with the almost Tolkien-esque fire writing, the kind of reveal of the what I keep seeing referred to as the cat's paw dagger.
Yes.
I don't know what a cat's paw is.
What I thought for years was the name of the dagger was the cat's paw. However, what I learned is that the cat's paw was the name of is what they called the assassin. So this dagger doesn't have a name. It's not like Dark Sister or, all of the different, like, ice and all the different swords that were named throughout Game of Thrones. This dagger, as of right now, does not have a name or not one that I could find. But people were referring to it as the cat's paw because for a long time, everyone thought it was because it was as an assassin blade, and then Arya used it, she's like twirling it around. So it was one of those things where people thought it was called the Cat's Paw, but it's not. It probably has a more grandiose name. We just haven't been told what it is yet.
That's what had intrigued me, because I read, episode reviews. I'll watch the episode and then I'm bound to have missed something, so I'll generally just Google episode 4 and have a look at the recap. Say, oh yes, that's right, that did happen. And when it's referred to as the cat's paw dagger, it's one word for one thing, cat's paw, and it's not capitalized. So it's like you, I was on the same page as that's not the name of the weapon. It's just a description of the weapon. So yeah, I should have at some point, especially I work in an editorial job, a dictionary to look it up. But so it means an assassin's weapon. Interesting. And it survives, as we know, all the way until the end of the Night King.
I am curious to know how, like, I know they're probably never going to go into the backstory, but I want to know how that Peter Baelish came into possession of that dagger, because it would seem like if it's supposed to be passed from heir to successor, that means he probably looted the body of Aerys II when Jaime Lannister killed him. Or somebody looted the body of the king and took that dagger, because it's supposed to be, on their person or, in their vicinity. So if that's what that particular dagger means, someone looted a corpse in the throne room. But it would have had to be
Peter Baelish would not have been above doing that. No. I feel.
And Jaime Lannister surprisingly was above it. He killed the king, stabbed him in the back, didn't loot the body. Peter Baelish seemed like the kind of guy that would have looted a body. Let's be honest.
He's kind of, I'll handle the cleanup. Don't worry.
I'll take care of this. Don't worry. Oh, look. Gonna take this mysterious dagger. But but I think that covers just about everything, Neal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, this was a blast. Absolutely.
I hope
I'm so glad to get the opportunity to interact.
Yes, because, I know.
So often the shows take place at night, when I'm asleep or whatever, and the daily news updates are kind of in a state of hiatus. Very understandably, I know what a drain that was on John and Way, but I always thought you did a tremendous job when you were called in to action on those. So it's been terrific to chat, particularly about this, a shared hobby or
maybe we'll have to do either a Lord of the Rings or a Doctor Who follow through.
Count me in. And I know WH would be on board, at least for Doctor Who, certainly.
Oh, will I have to tell him that his man Neal recommended it, or are you guys still kayfabe? Y'all don't get along.
We get along, but he insists that I am their man.
I'll take you too. I claim you, Neal. You're my man, Neal, too. Now I'm gonna have heat with WH. Not real heat. It's a joke, guys. But thank you for your time tonight. I'm going to wrap this up real quick. If you guys enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try to do more content that's not wrestling created, but related, but with my friends who are wrestling creators. Thank you so much and have a good night.